Hello, my name's Peter Robertson and I'm a Professor of Energy and Environmental Engineering in Queen's University in Belfast, and I also have been diagnosed with myelodysplastic syndrome. This is Blood Cancer Awareness Month, and it's one of the cancers that probably people have less awareness of, interestingly, even though it's probably one that affects a very significant number of the population. Blood cancers not only involve things like leukemia, but also lymphoma and myeloma. But there's also other lesser known forms of blood cancer, such as the myeloproliferative neoplasms and myelodysplastic syndromes, and it's MDS that I was diagnosed with. There are over 100 different types of blood cancer, so it's actually quite surprising that there isn't a greater awareness of it. But due to the great work that's being done by the likes of Friends of the Cancer Centre to raise the awareness, people are getting a greater understanding of this. Why do we want to have a greater understanding? Well, there's a number of reasons. We need to understand that quite a number of the population are impacted by this, but also to let people who may be suffering from symptoms to be aware of what those symptoms are, so they can get an early intervention, because the earlier it's diagnosed, better the outcome is likely to be. The other thing is people don't like using the phrase blood cancer, and I think it's important that people actually do feel free to talk about it, because so many people are impacted by it, whether it's people who've been impacted through their own diagnosis, or they're living with people, their families, and they're supporting families or friends or work colleagues with this. In terms of my own journey, I probably had been afflicted with this quite a number of years ago, but I was living in Scotland for 20 years and I'd been suffering quite a lot with infections. On blood tests, it turned out that I had low blood, white blood cell counts and neutrophil counts, but they were quite borderline, so they thought it was maybe just some idiopathic reason that I had this. However, when I moved to Northern Ireland and I was referred to the haematology unit, they were very, very proactive and engaged in quite a very broad range of blood tests. And in 2018 I was ultimately diagnosed following bone marrow biopsy with myelodysplastic syndrome. So following my diagnosis, I was put onto bi-weekly injections of a thing called GCSF, which is basically a treatment which helps the bone marrow stimulate the growth of white blood cells. So this has actually been quite transformational in terms of me living my life, and has actually kept me out of hospital, has reduced the number of infections that I've had. And while there are some challenging side effects at times in terms of discomfort, they are far outweighed by just how transformational this has been. I'm really lucky in the team that is looking after me here. I have a phenomenal consultant, Dr. Damien Finnegan, and I'm so lucky with my clinical nurse specialist, Caroline Kerr. I see them every 16 weeks now, roughly, just for routine blood tests. What's more is, outside that, if I ever require any assistance, I can contact either of them, and I also have the helpline number. So I am really, really well supported. And while I've ended up being hospitalised a couple of times as a result of infections, the rapidity of the support whenever I started getting very high temperatures was very, very impressive. And in one case I was actually on the ward within 45 minutes of phoning the helpline. So the support I've actually had here has been phenomenal. Actually getting the diagnosis was very positive in one respect, because I now knew why things were happening. But one of the things that I actually found was I wanted to get some external advice, or actually get some counselling. And one of the things I would say is my employer really stepped in and was absolutely phenomenal, because while there were long waiting lists elsewhere, my employer came in and the university put this in for me literally at 24 hours notice, and that was actually quite transformational for me. Beyond that though, I've had great support too from my colleagues and at the university, and something that people do find quite difficult is talking about issues and talking about the condition. And I found it was actually helpful to let people know what was happening or what was going on. This meant whenever I needed support, and at times I do have issues with fatigue, or sometimes the treatment can actually be quite uncomfortable. I'm maybe not firing on all cylinders, shall we say. And if people are aware of what's going on, I found they've been really, really helpful and really, really supportive and very, very kind. And I'm extremely grateful to everybody for the support I've been given. So it is challenging for people to actually be open about things. It worked for me. It's not going to work for everybody, but employers can only actually give you the support if they are aware of it. You don't necessarily have to talk to everybody about it, but from my perspective, it was actually very, very good for me to do that, and I found the help and advice and support I got was first rate. I also think it's important for people to realise post-diagnosis there is a lot of support out there, and it's important that people take advantage of the support that's there. For example, there is some fantastic information available through the likes of Macmillan and Blood Cancer UK, certainly around the blood cancers. Now, whenever people get diagnosed, quite often they'll go to Dr. Google, and it's very important that you get your information from the right sources, because there's been a proliferation of information there, and quite a lot of it is not helpful and can be very, very scary. However, going through to the right areas for information and the helplines, and I think it is important that people are aware that it's there and seek your information from reliable sources such as this. I found there are some very, very good forums with the likes of Macmillan and Blood Cancer UK themselves, where you can talk to people who are going through similar issues and similar challenges, and it's a very, very safe and non-judgmental environment to actually do this. These forums are all confidential, so people can actually be very, very open, and they're properly managed and moderated. May not be for everybody, but it is a good source of getting additional advice or talking to people who are maybe going through similar experiences. There's so many other people out there that are supporting patients like me, whether it's the team and Friends of the Cancer Centre, who are doing things to raise funding and supporting patients with cancer in Northern Ireland. And this can range from small things like providing tea and coffee to the patients who are attending clinics in Bridgewater, right through to actually paying for clinical nurse specialists. And it was my pleasure to actually help with this fundraising, and I've done the abseil down the outside of the City Hospital twice now, and I was hugely supported by friends and colleagues in work, and was able to give something back to the centre. We can't forget that the consultants and the clinical nurse specialists can't do their job without the important work that people doing the fundraising are actually providing. Friends of the Cancer Centre themselves, absolutely unique centre we have here in Northern Ireland, and the Friends of the Cancer Centre have been phenomenal, have done some great fundraising activities and provided great support to patients over many years. We're very lucky to have this resource here, but it only works if they can raise the funding. So please have a look. Just remember, this is our own support for cancer patients in Northern Ireland. They rely on the funding that comes from donations from people out there, and from the fundraising that people so generously give up their time. So that might seem like a little plug, but I'm very happy to do it. They've given me great support, and they give patients great support and staff in the hospitals in Northern Ireland here. So they absolutely deserve a shout out.